Norbert Rillieux, Creole chemist and inventor, born 1806, died 1894. Norbert Rillieux was an engineer whose creativity transformed the sugar industry. By devising a mechanism for controlling how sugar was extracted from beet and cane juice, he was able to cut labor and fuel costs and make high quality sugar readily available. Before his invention, sugar production was a slow, laborious, and expensive process that yielded unimpressive results. More than 150 years later, Rillieux's design remains the basis for today's sugar manufacturing techniques. The life Rillieux led was markedly different from that of other blacks in 19th century Louisiana. The son of a wealthy plantation owner, he was educated in Paris and lived a life of privilege and material comfort. Nevertheless, in his native Louisiana, he constantly faced prejudice, and despite all his accomplishments, he was still a second class citizen. Norbert Rillieux was born on March 17th, 1806, on the plantation of Vincent Rillieux, a wealthy French native. Vincent was Norbert's father, but his mother was Constance Vivant, a slave. Vincent Rillieux had been trained as an engineer. He invented a steam-powered cotton baling press. Young Norbert displayed intelligence and mechanical aptitude at an early age, and his father determined that he should receive the best education possible. Unfortunately, blacks in New Orleans, even free blacks, or those of mixed race, were not allowed to attend school. Fortunately for Norbert, his father was able to send him to school in Paris. The young Rillieux studied at l'École Centrale, where he excelled in his studies and showed a particular talent for engineering. By 1830, he had completed his education and was offered a position as instructor of applied mechanics. Over the next decade, he experimented with steam engines and steam evaporation, which would eventually form the basis for his most important invention. Rillieux returned to New Orleans in the 1830s and found a chance to put his experiments with evaporation to practical use. On the family plantation, he watched how slaves refined sugar from beets and cane. The painstakingly slow process, known as the Jamaican train, involved boiling cane or beet juice and ladling it from one kettle to another until it had boiled down into a crude molasses like substance. What Rillieux set out to do was devise a way that would not only refine sugar more quickly and efficiently, but also produce a finer sugar. He saw one possible answer in the evaporation pan, essentially a vacuum pan with condensing coils, essentially a vacuum pan with condensing coils that could boil liquid at a controlled temperature. Since sugar caramelizes at high temperatures, this control was critical. Early scientists had understood the concept of the evaporating pan, but their attempts were crude and not particularly efficient. Rillieux studied the problem and hit on the solution. By enclosing the condensing coils in vacuum chambers, the vapors from one chamber could heat and evaporate the juice under a higher vacuum. The higher the vacuum, the lower the temperature needed to be. Rillieux worked for more than a decade until he perfected his design, which was first used at the plantation of Theodore Packwood, who encouraged Rillieux's efforts just outside of New Orleans. The results of Rillieux's invention were several-fold. Because the liquid could be boiled at lower temperatures, less fuel was needed. The process was so efficient that it cut back significantly on labor, and the remaining sugar product was far superior in quality to that produced by the Jamaican train method. Rillieux received two patents in 1843 and 1846 for this evaporation mechanism. The Rillieux system revolutionized the production of sugar and was used in the US, Cuba, Mexico, and the West Indies. Eventually, the system was adapted for the manufacturing of such diverse products such as glue, soap, condensed milk, and paper. Although the machinery today is considerably more advanced, it is still essentially based on Rillieux's initial design. Despite Rillieux's success, he was still the victim of prejudice. In the eyes of Louisiana law, he was a colored man, and subject to the restrictions on all colored individuals. Neither his education nor his accomplishments could change the fact that he was born to a black mother. Free blacks in New Orleans were required to pay school taxes just like whites, but they cannot send their children to public schools. Rillieux, Rillieux put up with enormous restrictions and indignities, but when a new law enacted in 1854 required all colored individuals, slave or free, to carry a pass, he decided that he could tolerate no more. He left his home and returned to Paris, where he remained for the rest of his life. In later years, he became interested in Egyptology and spent a great deal of time deciphering hieroglyphic symbols. But he also continued his engineering, working to perfect his evaporation technique and continuing to patent his inventions. It is known that at some point in his life he married a woman named Emily Cuckow, who was 21 years his junior. Rillieux died in Paris on October 8th, 1894, and was buried in the famed Père Lachaise cemetery. Mrs. Rillieux died 18 years later. In the 1930s, a bronze plaque honoring Rillieux was placed in the Louisiana State Museum. Citations are in the description.